We're having to negotiate a TV studio here that's been kind of worked on a little bit, and there's been some advancement. And this is Conant Show. Today is Wednesday, the 28th of March, 2018, and I have a special guest tonight, everybody. A new legislator representing everything in Ulster County west of Woodstock.
Yes,
And
District 22.
This is District 22, and this is Kathy Nolan. And thanks for coming on my show.
Really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure. And we started a little chit-chatting before the DVD was going, and I had mentioned that we got acquainted over the years at the movie theater as you being one of my customers. And I think it was horses that kind of was on the radar at first. Are you still keeping horses?
Yeah, I've always loved horses, but I don't have them where I'm living now, so haven't had them for many years.
Many years. Oh,
yeah,
okay. But you still ride or something?
I would if I had the chance, yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up riding both Western and English and in shows and enjoyed that enormously. So that was one of the things that we could talk about, and something in your family as well.
Yes, that's true. My dad was a top-level equestrian, he had taken 3 bronze medals in equestrian events in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin.
Wow.
Working for the military as a spy.
And
athlete.
And athlete.
Yeah, he's a top athlete. His first command was on horseback in Montana, Wyoming, and places of that sort, pulling Indian duty.
Wow.
The last unmechanized cavalry unit.
I have a lot of military on one side of my family, and I suspect there's some of the cavalry units in that history as well, although I don't know the details of it.
Yeah. So, one of the things we talked about before the show over the past 2 days is and this is something I often do with my guests, is I like to wrap the show into how'd you get to Woodstock, or why Woodstock, or such. So,
well, I think of Woodstock as being the kind of a spiritual draw for me and for many people. I actually came to this area, came to the Catskills about 30 years ago to study at a Zen monastery in Mount Tremper.
Uh-huh.
And I found in the Zen offerings something that was very comfortable for me in terms of my Catholic upbringing. And within a year, I moved into the monastery and lived there many years, and had trained as a physician and was doing writing and research. When I left the monastery, I looked to find ways that I could continue to do something useful. And so I started working with a small Tibetan organization, a nonprofit, raising money for the people of Tibet. And I also started doing more things at the kind of public health level, where I was trying to protect the environment here in the Catskills, and eventually was hired by Catskill Mountain Keeper and worked on the fracking issues.
So you must know Betsy Stang and Jim Davis.
Yes.
Yeah, very good friends of mine. They're very deeply involved in those things.
Yeah, and what happens for a lot of us, I think, in the Woodstock area is that things that we care about, we can bring together in new kind of creative ways. Mm-hmm. So I had never been a direct advocate for the environment, but there were people that were doing that and wanted to know what was the science and what did the medical profession think about the health impacts of people living near fracking wells or compressor stations and pipelines. So I started using the skills that I had developed in medical school and in my training to work on new kinds of problems. And we enlisted the help of people in the arts, celebrities and filmmakers, and we talked to religious people and business people. We tried to make sure that everybody knew what the real problems were. And so we ended up with the first ban or decision not to go forward with fracking of any state in the United States that actually has oil and gas deposits under the ground.
Shale oil.
Shale oil. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of what I think of as Woodstock, as this spirit of kind of going into new realms and exploring them and trying to make the world a better place, using all of our creative abilities.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I would say that I had a spiritual draw here as well, but it was more obtuse than that. A friend of mine, a business associate and good friend of mine, Andy Nixon's ex-wife, was here, and she needed some work done on the house, but her boyfriend didn't like Andy, so I got the job, and that's how I landed in here. And her son died in a horrible car accident, and I had a big hand in raising the lad. His name is escaping me at the moment. Anyway, so I kind of was on a mission to release that, grief, with Ginger. Mm-hmm. And so for the 6 months that I worked for Ginger here, I ended up meeting some other folks and ended up getting work here. And this was 1992, 93 that I came here. And so I've been back and forth to other realms and back, and Woodstock has always treated me well. So it's there's strange, a lot of great stories that the different guests I've had about how they actually landed in Woodstock, and you seemed to had were drawn by the Tibetan or the Buddhist.
Yep, the spiritual connection
work.
was what got me here, but then almost everything that I've done in my life kind of gets used here. And it's an amazing place, the Catskills Park and the Adirondack Park.
Gateway, we're the gateway.
Yeah, being set aside as forever wild areas already. That's a wonderful notion that there are lands just set aside for the use and enjoyment of people. Mm. And that doesn't happen everywhere in the country, especially in large parcels like we have. So a lot of my work for Catskill Mountain Keeper has been to protect and enhance the Catskill Park.
Now the park boundaries encompasses, is it 3 million acres or more than that?
It's 700,000 acres in the Catskill Park, and then if you add the Adirondacks in, it gets up into the millions.
Well, that's I heard the figure about 6 million acres altogether.
Wow.
Between I don't know if it's both of them or just the one. I only know that because my Mohawk friends are still fighting for their territorial rights up there. That was sort of happened around the turn of the last century. 1900 to 1910 is when some federal and state decrees went down and removed the title to the territory from the Haudenosaunee, from the Five Nations.
Yeah, I sometimes feel that it's a little bit of what we can give back to Native peoples if we take care of land well. So I think that those land claims also need to be addressed and dealt with fairly. Yeah. But it seems that, to me, that what may be more important than the particular genetics or I don't think the Native peoples mainly thought in terms of ownership of land, but if we steward the land in a way that is as loving and protective and holistic as the Native American people were doing when Europeans first arrived on this continent, then I think we're doing, then maybe we're no longer invaders, but new people in the tribe. It's
well, that's a really lovely thought, and my friends up north would really appreciate that. And it's not just up north. I mean, where there's Native populations all through New York State, and that's, they don't teach that in school very much. That Native Americans, American Indians, or First Nations. I mean, there's so many monikers for the original peoples here. But New York State is actually culturally very rich and has I think 13 territories, reserves, and territories that are still in the control of the tribal systems, tribal governments, and or native nations. That's another way to look at it. The philosophy, the old philosophy is such that the land doesn't belong to the people belong to the land,
And I would subscribe to that. I think that we should treat our earth, our soil, our water, and our air as a resource that is common to all, and that the use of it should be by those who are giving something back through that use, not taking something out, not extractive industries. So we had First Nation peoples who supported the ban on fracking in New York State.
Absolutely.
And now we're working on a ban on fracking in the Delaware River Basin. The Delaware River Basin Commission has proposed such a ban, and we're trying to encourage the commissioners to include no fracking waste and no water withdrawals. Basically, again, stewarding the land so that it continues to be fresh, good water for everyone, clean air for everyone. That's the foundation that we all need to live a healthy life. And so any industry that is going to have an adverse impact on that has to be reined in. And we have to find better ways of doing things like heating our homes and lighting our homes. Burning the fossil fuels from the ground underneath that we stand on is not a really advanced way of providing heat and light for ourselves, especially when we have a huge generator up in the sky in the form of the sun, and we have winds that will provide enormous amounts of power. So we're decades behind where we should be on making that transition.
And even those technologies are being eclipsed by newer forms of energy, or not forms, but discoveries in energy. And there's zero-point energy, these kinds of quantum energy sources that are really. In shorthand, it's hard to describe, but there is a potential source, as well as free electrons in the atmosphere, just from the electrical nature of our environment, of our cosmos. I'm a big fan of Nikola Tesla, and he was able to develop an electric car in the 1920s, even 19-teens. That drew ions just right from the atmosphere and was converted to work energy right in the vehicle. There was no battery, no need for a battery. So a lot of that got suppressed. So that's one of my bugaboos, is that there's a lot of great technology that's being suppressed, and it seems like we're being stuck in the brick and mortar modality of industry unnecessarily.
Well, there's certainly a lot of old discoveries that we need to unearth and bring forward, and Tesla is a great place to look for some of that. There's also, I think, young people are feeling like they should be able to create something and give it out and not patent it and keep it just for one corporation or to make money. So we're seeing advances in battery technology. We're seeing cars that are run on exchange of ions, like you're talking about, in using salt water.
Yes, right.
There are many realms in which we've just begun to tap what we can do with technology. But I think we also need to look at whether or not we are living in a way that's just ever faster and ever more consumptive. That is, that we're trying to get more and more. That's kind of the old economic model.
Well, wait a minute. I got to defend humanity a little bit, because I don't think the we word is really fair in the sense of that there is this demand from young people or older people for all of these gadgets and all of these things. I think that's a sell. we're sold all this stuff, first psychologically, and then advertised, and then just driven by what is released into the various markets, whether it's an Android phone or now this is so interesting that you're here, because just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now, Joe Barton was here, and I forgot to honor Paula Gloria, who's very, very, very gracefully making this show happen with us tonight as our tech. So thank you, Paula. And anyway, so I started talking about these terrible idea of Amazon 40-foot tractor trailers being automated, pilotless. Okay, and the gist of my idea is it was from an NPR interview, and I can't remember. I wish I could give credits here, but I can't. And it was a couple of interviews. One was with a trucker who was the backup pilot in the experimental tractor trailer that's self-driving, and his sentiment was, we're being replaced. We're not needed anymore. I'm just sitting here to make sure it functions properly. And, we're going to be looking at the end of, a whole sector of employment for all those truckers if this thing keeps moving forward. And then in a subsequent interview was a oil rig repair operator. And he had his machine shop out in not Waco, Texas, but one of those, maybe Abilene or something like that. Anyway, it was one of the oil towns out there in Texas. And he had this, machine shop that for the last 47 years, he and his son and, had been repairing the oil rigs. And they were all American made. And now they're not. And not only are they, outstripping his ability to fix them with the kind of components that they're automated. So now there are completely automated drilling rigs that on tractor treads drive out to the site, clamp onto the earth, poke holes in the ground, and there's no human interface other than a control operator at a joystick and a computer screen hundreds of miles away. So, and this is they're estimating 50,000 roughnecks have been put out of work already. Yeah. All right, and the reason this came up is that America is producing so much more oil now with advances in fracking and other technologies, including this automated thing with these. If you've ever seen an oil rig, they're not small. No. It's almost mind-boggling that they're completely automated now. What I'm bringing you to, because I'm setting you up for a thought, is that I expressed on camera about 3 weeks ago that I'm not comfortable driving on a highway with automated tractor trailers, because how safe is a machine, and what kind of decisions is it going to make as opposed to a human driver? Is its programming going to tell it to get from point A to point B with how much regard? Okay, even just on that level. And
this is one of the things that we in America, in the United States, really do in a very strange way. We allow industries that are very big and that affect thousands or even millions of people to do new things all the time with very little regulation or monitoring. So the whole fracking problem arose because the oil and gas industry went and started with a new technology that they felt comfortable with, and they started doing out in the western states first, and then in Pennsylvania. There was very little oversight other than within the industry itself. And the industry was able to get the national government to remove regulations that would otherwise have applied. self-driving cars, it's not clear who would regulate them.
Well,
but I'm a physician. If I wanted to use a new medication, the number of years of research that would have to go into showing that medication is safe and effective is decades in many cases.
And very expensive too.
And I know the topic of wireless communications is a really important one for you, and it's another realm in which the ability to actually do research on the health impacts has been taken away by regulation, so that we have increasing amounts of telecommunications activities that are taking place without anybody studying and being able to tell whether or not we're hurting anybody while we're trying to do something that at least somebody in the society thinks is a good thing.
Yeah, before we run too far along into that, I want to finish the thought. So as I was talking about this, it really got to Joe, because he thinks legally a lot. And he got on camera and started questioning, well, if you have a machine kill a human, who's held responsible? So we kind of hashed that out for a few minutes, and that was one thought.
Did you decide that it was the manufacturer of that machine?
Well, we didn't decide anything, because it's a new realm that hasn't been decided on by anybody yet. It hasn't even been explored. And Joe went right to that, I thought, and 2 weeks later, I'm reading, like, this is last weekend or 6 days ago, I'm reading in where did I hear this? Probably NPR again, maybe. There was it was a newspaper. Anyway, the first fatality of a driverless car called an Uber car, one of the Uber cars, and they're going driverless along with Amazon, and they had a human pilot in there that was to gain
Monitor.
control of the vehicle if it does something stupid, and it ran a woman over crossing the street with a bicycle and killed her. So we have now our test case already. I mean, I almost feel like we jinxed the thing, but here it is. It's in our face. And so now, these corporate issues are now going to have to be examined. And I was online. That's where I read it. I read it on MSNBC. And now the initial probe or investigation into this thing is that, well, we don't need that many sensors. So they eliminated it. In their test vehicles, they eliminated. And I get a kick out of this, is they're testing this thing live in traffic when they should have been testing it in a test proving grounds of some kind.
Absolutely. And I think that's the sense in which we have allowed corporations and manufacturers, as a subset of that, to only take responsibility for a part of their actions. We should be asking somebody who manufactures something or who is in an industry to take responsibility from the very first part of their activity to handling that product until it's removed from the common realm.
Yeah.
So cradle to grave responsibility. And when we do that, then we don't have who would think of putting that car out there if they know that they're responsible?
Uber does,
but
so does Amazon.
There was a question, there was a question. We can do this, and we need to be the first. And so the pressure to be the first or to make the most lets people ignore the broader realm of how do we be really the best in terms of not only serving the customer who's in the car, but serving all those who are around. And that means not running somebody over and killing them, but it also means not having emissions that poison the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it means building the car out of materials that themselves can be either reused or recycled. So having the notion that any action we take, we are responsible for the consequences of that action, should lead us in the direction of being, I think, much more careful than many of our corporations are here in the United States.
Well, and that brings us to the idea of the microwave pollution. You could call it pollution. One term that I encountered is microwave trespass upon biological systems. And because you're talking about a real thing. Now, microwaves are a thing. They are a real thing, and they can penetrate through walls, through floors, through X amount of feet of earth.
Some of them.
Different microwave lengths. Proximity has a lot to do with it. Shielding is best by distance. The further away you get from it, the better. But specific to telecommunications, we are now this 5G rollout, and I guess, does 5G represent 5 gigahertz? Is that what it is?
No, I think it's fifth generation.
Fifth generation, okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
And I'm not an expert in that realm yet.
Yeah.
I am reading and trying to become an expert because we have the governor's effort to include in his budget rolling out that technology. I think much before we have really seen the impacts and really parsed what the benefits are and who could be harmed and who could be benefited.
There's good friend Steve Romine, you may know him, has sent me an email in one of his email blasts of some breaking news, which is some definitive studies coming out of Italy that these particular bandwidths that are being utilized now are very, very specifically, definitively causing brain tumors and tumors on the heart.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a new study. It's hot off the press, and this is real.
Well, I find that the research that we are doing is very helpful, but it's behind the level at which the industry is moving. And that's the same thing we had with fracking. We knew that there was a biology and chemistry of the components of fracking and what was being released. We knew the geology. We knew these were high pressure waves underground. And so we had the sense that this was likely to cause contamination, and we could trace out pathways of likely contamination, and then people would be potentially harmed. And so we argued not to move ahead until we could work some of that out. The same situation is present with a lot of the microwave technologies. I've been for decades favored cabled use of electricity and electromagnetic waves rather than using wireless or Wi-Fi or microwaves.
And optical fiber optics is a fabulous technology. Absolutely nothing wrong with it at all.
Because you can contain the waves so that they're not dispersed through the environment. We know with cell phones that people who use a cell phone regularly, which is many times a week, will have a 3 times higher instance of brain cancer. And they get the cancers on the side of the head where they hold the phone. Now, brain cancer is very rare.
Two of my friends.
There's a lot of people around this area because we have a lot of people that are into tech and that are creative and willing to adopt early and use. But I will not put a cell phone to my head, and I encourage people to keep their cell phones a distance from their body. I discourage parents from letting their children play with devices that are, have an electromagnetic field like a tablet, because we don't know yet just how much change in the body that will cause. We know in the laboratory it will cause changes and can cause cancer and can actually kill cells. Does it do that same thing in the human body? We haven't done that as a randomized trial. That would be immoral. But we can.
But we can just saturate the airwaves anyway. Right?
No, well,
that's the crux of the biscuit. That's the problem here.
Here in the United States, in Europe, the government policies tend to be run by what's called the precautionary principle, which is when you have a series of scientific investigations that indicates that likelihood of human harm, you hold off on introducing it or you use it in very small areas where people volunteer to be exposed, and you get some experience with the actual activity, rather than just saying, well, we haven't seen any problems yet today. What time is it? We haven't seen any problems yet. But many of these influences have very subtle influences. Cancers develop over years or decades. Other kinds of problems develop over long periods of time. And if you introduce the technology very, very broadly, it becomes very difficult to tell if it has an effect.
No, you can't suss it out because you're dealing with an invisible things.
Not only are they invisible themselves, but you have so many different toxins and contaminants, if you will, in the atmosphere that if you see somebody sick, how do you determine which one it was?
Right.
So I certainly believe that people should be able to live in areas where they are relatively free from electromagnetic contamination, as well as other kinds of toxins in the air or in the environment. And that was one of the problems with the governor's proposal. If it went everywhere all at once, then you lose the ability to even tell if it's doing any harm. There were many other problems as well. For my district that I was newly elected to represent, we have several towns that don't yet have broadband service. So I certainly feel that they should have cabled access to broadband in their homes before we start putting wireless technology across other areas of the state. Bring everybody up to a level that they have asked for, and so people in my district certainly asking to have broadband access.
There are people in your district that don't even have fiber optic cable.
Oh, definitely don't have fiber optic. Don't even have cable to be able to have cable internet at their home. In Denning, very few people.
I'm just curious.
They would have to use satellite.
She said, and wireless satellite.
Yeah.
What my question is do they have landline telephones?
Yes.
So.
But you're not suggesting they use dial-up for their technology business.
Yes.
That's not going to work very well for them.
I had AT&T service that was, I don't know, part of my phone bill, and it wasn't dial-up. It was DSL.
DSL.
Dedicated line.
Yeah.
And that worked very fast. It was fine. That was over 10 years ago.
Yeah, I've used DSL, and it will work for modest business purposes. But it does seem that it is reasonable for a person to want to be able to have a high-tech business and live in a place like this. And I'd like for my constituents to have that. To have a cable run to every part of this county and really throughout the state, I think is, in today's world, a minimum service. It is like having a telephone. It's like having a television. People turn to their computer and want to have the speeds that they need to do both work and
this is how they're selling the
recreation.
5G. They're selling it as this is going to make everything faster, better, and nicer, and so on and so forth. But, signals carried on light waves in a fiber optic cable are probably as unlimited as any other medium, and it's safer. You just don't want to look at it. I almost got a job being a cable repairman, and part of it is testing, and you got to be really careful you don't look at the fiber optic ends because there's laser light, basically.
Pretty bright.
But the point is that it works, it's reliable, and it works really good. So the obstacle here is that there are competing technologies. The wireless is wanting to I don't know what they want, to tell you the truth. I'm speaking out of my ears here. But the point that I'm trying to get at is that there is this real drive to sell wireless almost everything. And my vision is really, let's not do that.
I agree. And we see in some undeveloped or relatively undeveloped areas of the world where they're leapfrogging from no technology to a very advanced technology. And I think that's what we should do in terms of leapfrogging from DSL, dial-up, and cable service to fiber optic. The advantage, I suspect, for the companies of going wireless is it's much less expensive than running those cables. But the trade-off for me is if you run the cables, you have fantastic speeds, and you have what we believe to be, based on the science we have, a very safe way of bringing these services to people.
Safe and secure. There's another thing. With all this wireless business going on, what you got, the ability to hack into the airwaves is, readily available to anybody who knows how to do it. Whereas hacking into a solid line is that takes a whole nother layer and level of sophistication.
So this is another benefit of going with the cabled or fiber optic approach rather than an approach that spews something into the air and that we haven't studied and which we have reason to believe would have harmful health effects, if not on everybody, at least on a subset of people who have sensitivity to this. And we need to protect the community as a whole and think in a much more holistic way. So this is something I think that the 5G and the wireless technologies are an example of how poorly we handle the introduction of new technologies. And we have a mood in the country, or at least in parts of the country, of deregulating industries to allow them to make more money and to serve their stockholders. They may think of it as to do more good, but their real bottom line is to serve their stockholders. And if we do not have a way of balancing that, now there might be other good ways of balancing it. Maybe we build in a requirement that these companies actually take care of the communities they serve and that we try to measure that rather than having overarching regulations. I'm not looking for regulations to do everything, but it's frustrating to me to be in a time in our country when people are asking me to help them get broadband and get services in their communities, but I have no regulators or no resources from the federal government coming in and saying to the industry, you must supply that, and you must supply it in a way that's safe for those people. We don't have that focus on providing a service if you're going to be allowed a license, as we did for many years in this country. And I think we have to have some mechanism of having the companies be accountable. You mentioned litigation earlier and who would be held responsible. I think that can potentially play a role, but it can get a little wild if everybody has to sue when they get run over by a driverless car. That shouldn't be something that we solve after the fact. We should be solving that before we get to that point.
Well, that raises a lot of issues. One is the end of that sort of series of interviews about automation. The sort of the sentiment at the end of it is well, the message is very clear. Humans are not necessary anymore. We're being replaced. Well, and that it is that part of the sentiment, and one of the people that were speaking, is that things, technology, automation, artificial intelligence is moving so fast that the most of us civilians out here, consumers, whatever they want to call us, human beings, are really not cognizant of just how fast these technologies and policies and everything else that goes with it is going to impact us.
How fast they're moving. One of the things that I did a while ago was decide that there were good technologies and bad technologies. And my definition for a good technology is that it actually reduced work, and a bad technology created more work. So an answering machine on your telephone or a voicemail is actually bad technology, because somebody can make you do more work while you're already busy not answering the phone because you're already working. Mm. So now you got to do that work plus the work that the person left on your messaging device. And good technology, my prime example of that was a washing machine. because going out and beating clothes against rocks in a stream is definitely a lot of hard work that the washing machine takes care of. But even the idea that we want to get rid of work is something that we need to look at. I'm not opposed to it because I actually like to play. And so if we play well and we don't have a society that measures your worth by your work, then we might do all right to have these. If this machine could be safe and could actually do the job, then maybe it would be okay, as long as we are happy with the person then writing and playing music or telling a story, or if we don't make humans useless because they're not working. And we may need to do that whether we are automated or not.
Yeah,
that's right,
whether
because
we like it or not.
Unless we don't grow our population as rapidly as we have been, we'll have so many people that not having work is going to be a problem.
Well,
Even
not
without
having work is a problem
It
already.
already is.
I mean,
Exactly.
in different parts of the world, Europe has itself a pretty serious problem on its hand from all the refugee influx coming into places like Sweden, Norway, England. Well, England brought that upon itself. The whole world lives in England. But the thing is that these all of these people that are looking to the northern hemisphere to find employment, are finding that it's not there because in these northern latitudes you have really limited resources that you can keep people busy with. There's the growing seasons are shorter. There's a lot of different reasons for all of that. But the thing is these huge displacements of peoples is tragic on kind of both ends. From where they have leave and to where they go, and that's another topic for another day because I don't even know where I'm going with it at the moment. Other than
I would
that,
say this.
what do we do? Like I'm a craftsman. I do a lot of different things, and with all of this automation, what will people do? And as you say, there's the arts and the music and these kind of creative endeavors, which my mother said, never become an artist. I will disown you. You'll never end up, making anything of yourself. But anyway, those kinds of values. I want to turn this around a little bit. In the traditional societies, now I had the benefit of nearly 20 years with Mohawks and Senecas and learning, a lot of the old stories of their histories and that, possibly the biggest single difference between, a native indigenous culture and a colonial culture is that the colonials peoples don't know who they are. They don't know their relationship to the land. They don't know their relationship to the air and the water in these new places. And since they are, leaving some other place, they're forgetting who they were. All right, so kind of, now you fast forward to today, and in the United States, Canada, Mexico, there's this huge, population of people who don't really know who they are in their place in the world and the cosmos, in the bigger picture.
I think that's it, exactly. And I think we all are going to have to face that question more with this question of, if we don't have to work or we can't work, how do we define our worth? And what is it to be a human being? It's a relatively modern thing, I think, to think that you are something of value based on your work.
This gets into a real interesting thought.
15 minutes for your interesting thought.
There's this thing called transhumanism going on. And in this idea that, my native friends would talk about is that, the roles that man and woman and children and elderly people all have like a role. They all have a purpose in the community. You know, they all, you know, so it's like, since I'm a dad, I couldn't be a warrior. So the warriors were both male and female, but they didn't have children yet. You know, or they just didn't have children. But once you have children,
then you're a parent.
You have to stay behind the lines, behind the warriors, and you don't act as a warrior until you have to, until there's no warriors, and you're minding the children and the elderly. You know, so there's this kind of a job definition, or it escapes me what that's called, but anyway. The idea is that, you know,
the division of labor.
Division of labor, right? You know, but then there's also, you know, you have the social mores and norms and taboos and all of those things that go along with it. And when I was living with a Seneca elder, Twyla, in the 80s, you know, it was a very big thing about. You know, the whole gay rights thing, right, was really sort of exploding after the 1970s, really starting before that. But as I remember it, you know, and I just, you know, one day something was in the news, you know, paper or whatever, and I asked Twyla, I go, you know, hey, what's the Native perspective on homosexuality? And she said, well, it existed in our old culture. It existed. It happened. And the way it was thought of is that, like any different human being, they're teachers. So if they got a child that was somehow impaired, they regarded that child who had special needs as a teacher for the rest of the community, or for that family, or whatever. And that when you had people with same-sex sexual preference, they said, well, they were teachers. They were teachers of a wider dimension of loving. And I thought that was a really lovely way to answer my question. But now we have this transgender thing going on, which, real interesting fact is that it hasn't become what it is today without first a whole lot of what they call hormone imitators getting into our food supply. And they are plastic coatings on the inside of cans, on the inside of milk bottles, milk jugs.
Endocrine disruptors,
Yeah, and there's a specific class, MB, that's in gasoline too. It's an additive in gasoline. So it's in the atmosphere, and these impact the sex organs as well, you know, in adults, but it also impacts the developing, fetus, embryo, and so on. And so as this transgender reality has set in, it is happening at the same time, or concomitantly, I guess I'm trying to say, with this heavy-duty impact on our biological systems with these chemicals that are additives, or even just being thrown off the plastics themselves, and just leaching into leaching into our water, leaching into our food, and the sex definition is becoming more and more blurred on a biological level, but on a psychological level, it is as well. And so there's this identity issues are coming up that didn't exist 30 years ago.
Well, I'm very concerned about the endocrine disruptors and the hormone imitators. Those are real. They're in fracking chemicals. They're in plastics, as you said.
Fuels.
Fuels, and our waste management systems do not remove them from the stream, the waste stream. In fact, in some ways, they concentrate them. So I am concerned about that, and those chemicals are likely having chemical and biological effects on people. But I think that the question of transgender identity would be happening now, even if that were not true.
Why?
And that,
What's
the reason
thought?
I think that is that I think that what you said before, that we have opened up questions about identity that in an earlier time the culture might have made room for. But for many years we didn't. We've had, especially with very dominant monotheistic religions, we've had sexuality defined as being of only one type. And
Right.
the society has pushed everything to try to be within that. And in the 70s and since, and in a wonderful, beautiful way in the last decade, we've seen that people are going, no, what's really important is whether you love somebody, not the gender that you have, and not the physical expression, perhaps. But we've also had people then say, well, then, why do we even have gender? Why do we have male and female?
I can answer that.
Better not do that on air. But the question of gender, from a medical perspective, there are all kinds of different places where gender is not nearly as clearly defined as our society has made it. So we have people who have 3 X chromosomes. We have people who have 2 Ys and 1 X. We have people who are genetically female but have testosterone levels that are higher than some men who are genetically men but have a lower testosterone level. So we know that gender is a very fluid issue. And then we have a society that now is saying, well, maybe we don't restrict you based on your gender identity. So I think we've opened it up that somebody who feels like a female in a male body can say, well, why can't I express that? Why would I not be allowed to express that? What is new, I think, is that we have medical treatments and surgical treatments that allow that expression to be much more full for that individual who feels that. But I do believe that we see in books and in historical records evidence that there were men who felt trapped as a woman in a man's body and women who felt trapped
Sure.
and the opposite. So I believe that it's wonderful for people to be able to explore that and really feel that the society has an obligation to kind of make space for whatever their expression is. I find it a very healthy development for us as individuals and as a society.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
I think, though, we have to kind of look at the emotional maturity of our civilization.
Yeah, and
Because when specifically, I know of a story. I actually know the person, and what had happened was genetically male, taking drugs to be female, estrogen, I guess, and getting in trouble on college campus for using the wrong bathroom. Right? Because it was problematic for the females to have transgender male sharing the bathrooms. They didn't feel safe, or whatever it is. It's kind of really, and if you want to turn that even around for the safety of the transgender person, I mean, they themselves have a tough enough road as it is with identifying the way they identify themselves, and then how they're accepted by their friends, family, peers, and public at large. I mean, there's that can
yeah, but let's roll that back because
Sure.
it's not usually coming from a person who is transgendered. not to be able to use the bathroom of their choice. They would like, anybody, I think, would like to be able to use the bathroom of their choice. So the question is, what baggage... How clean is the bathroom is the main point. Yes, that could be.
Japanese ones are the best, apparently.
Yes. But the question is, what reasonable expectation do we have when we go into a bathroom? We should not have an expectation of perfect privacy, although some reasonable privacy, and we should not be attacked or put down, made to feel vulnerable. But the person who tends to be attacked in those situations is not the person who's cisgendered, who's using the restroom facility. It's the transgendered person who is usually verbally abused, not physically attacked, but verbally abused. And there's just really no evidence that there have been any problem with a transgendered person using a bathroom as a place to victimize anybody else. So I think that is a case of our cultural expectation just not having caught up with a new reality, which is that a person may come into the bathroom who didn't start out with the same physical anatomy as you, but is now using that bathroom and is using it as the same gender as you are.
Right.
And I think we can make space for that. I think we'll be a better
there's bigger
world
problems.
if we make space for
there's
that.
There's bigger problems in the world than that. Absolutely
But we ought to solve this one, and I think we ought to solve it with kindness.
Well, yeah, I think that's always a good route. But I also think when we talk about these surgical options that weren't available before that are now, it's just in my mind it's a disturbing kind of a thing. Although it's intriguing. Yeah, not quite sure where I was going with that, but the idea is that
it does raise issues. But I think if we can be spacious about these kinds of issues, it helps us be spacious about other things that we need to be spacious about as well. And that means, I think, that if we have a person with a disability come into that bathroom, a physical disability, at one time that wouldn't have been tolerated. Now we take that as a matter of course. A person with a psychological disability. I think there's a lot of things where we've put things into the realm of morality and the right and wrong that if we can make a little more room, we can take care of everybody. And that's really where I'd like to see us
getting everybody's
focus.
needs met.
Exactly.
Yeah. 1 minute. Okay, so we clearly just beat that hour up. I told you it would go by fast. Kathy Nolan, you're a real smart lady, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
What's the name of your district?
My district is District 22. That's Olive, Shandaken, Denning, and Hardenberg. And we're just west of Woodstock.
Fabulous, fabulous. I hope you come back.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to.
We haven't really scratched the top of the barrel here of all the things we can talk about.
I always enjoy talking with you, George.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching Conant Show. Tune in next week and be happy.